Okay, here we are. It's Monday morning. It's a little bit airy today. We just have seen like an orange-red sun, so we came outside to film it just in case there were any zombies or anything jumping out. But what I want to tell you about is what we looked at on Sunday, and we were looking at Philippians chapter 2, verse 12 to 30. And I guess my big point was that God's restoration in His people makes them shine, and it also makes other Christians glad. So we thought a lot about how God restores people. We thought a lot about kind of Everton Library, which is just over there, which is a library that's kind of fallen down. But if someone rich were to buy it, they could then do it up from the inside out, and then it would make a big difference in its community. And we saw in verse 13 that it's God who buys us back in the start of chapter 2, and then He works in us to change our wills, so what we want, and change our actions as well. And so Paul commands the Philippians and us in verse 12, the verse before, to work out our salvation. So Paul was saying we need to work out what God's working inside of us. And then he gave us an example of what that looks like. One way that we're restored, one way that we can see ourselves growing, becoming more of the people that we're meant to be, rather than just kind of shells twisted up by sin. It's seen in verse 14 in the fact that we don't grumble or argue. So there's some things that we'll be discussing about that in our small groups. And then we saw in verse 19 to the end 2 examples of people whose lives are being restored, whose lives have changed from the twisted up world. So we saw Timothy, a guy who was really genuinely concerned for others rather than just himself. So we'll have a look at Timothy, and we'll also look at Epaphroditus, who was this Philippian guy from their church who'd been and visited Paul, and it says that he risked his life for the gospel. So we'll get to know a little bit about him. My hope and prayer is that as we look through this passage, we'll see kind of the big message of chapter 2, which I guess we've seen in verse 3 and 4, that we should do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility value others above yourself, not looking out to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. We'll be thinking about how can we practically have the mindset of Christ Jesus. We'll be thinking about how God does that work in us, so we work it out. I hope you enjoyed tonight.